This video will show you how to replace the front lower ball joint on a Ford Edge. This is part of your front steering and suspension, located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. A quick note about this repair: when it's done, you're going to need a four-wheel alignment. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front end of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've completed that, we're going to start removing the wheel. If you have a center cover, go ahead and remove that first. Typically, you're going to find a small slot that you could carefully pry in. For this, I'm just using a small pry bar. Once you've removed that, you're going to remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts, and then we can remove that wheel. On the outboard side of where the brake rotor is, we're going to make sure we use a spacer and one of our original lug nuts to help prevent the rotor from moving on us while we continue on here. We're moving to the outer tie rod end mounting hardware next. Typically, you're going to find a cotter pin of some sort. Go ahead and remove that. We'll set that aside for disposal. Continuing on, we're going to remove our mounting nut. We're using an 18mm for our tie rod mounting nut. Now that I have this broken free, I'm leaving it on the stud, just a couple threads here. We'll start separating the outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle. Now to separate this, if you do not have a tie rod end separator tool, you could carefully use a hammer. A quick note about this: be extremely careful around your ABS sensor and wire, and you also want to be careful not to cause any damage. We're tapping directly on the knuckle here. You could also carefully tap along the top of the mounting nut in this area. Now that we have the outer tie rod end separated from our steering knuckle, we're going to start dislodging our front sway bar link from the lower control arm. Now down in this area is where we can see where our front sway bar link connects to our lower control arm. We're using an 18mm to start removing this mounting nut. There we are. Now we can start looking at where the ball joint connects to our front knuckle. You have a 16mm headed mounting bolt that makes its way through the knuckle. It goes past the ball joint stud along the center area here, and then on the far side you'll have a 15mm mounting nut. Now we'll start removing that bolt. You may have to tap it out of position. If that's the case, we'll just use a small hammer and punch. You want to be careful not to damage the bolt. There's our mounting bolt. Double check to make sure it's not rotted and weak. This looks good. Now commonly, the next thing that you're going to find is the ball joint stud will be stuck inside of the steering knuckle. If that's the case, use some penetrant and we'll use a hammer and chisel. As far as that hammer and chisel, we're going to go right in between the 2 ears on the back side of the knuckle. We're attempting to gently separate these. We do not want to cause any damage to our knuckle. Now once you do see some movement, we're going to have to carefully start pulling down on the control arm, and then we'll pull the knuckle away. You want to be extremely careful not to cause any damage to your axle CV boots, whether it's the outside boot or the inside boot. There we are. So now as I'm pulling down on this control arm, I'm going to use a small spacer on my control arm, and I'm coming all the way up towards my front strut. Now keep in mind, things can move around a little bit here, so you do not want to get stuck in a pinch point. Let's continue on by carefully pulling this rearward. We're not putting a tug on the axle, but we do want to gain access to that ball joint. With the front steering knuckle pulled away from where the lower ball joint is, we're focusing along the top of the lower control arm where the ball joint connects. You're going to find that you have a small snap ring that needs to be removed. I have some angled snap ring pliers. We'll make our way into each of the two circular ports, gently spread the ears, and lift this up and out of position. Now, to remove the ball joint from the lower control arm, if you have an adapter that can slide over this and press onto the boot and to the base of the ball joint, you can use that. If you do not have the specific adapter, you can just take the top of the ball joint press, slide it over the stud. Down along the bottom, we need to have a cup that fits over the ball joint and only hits up against the lower control arm. Now, since the bottom of my cup does have a small port in it, I'm just using another adapter so I can hold that in place. There it is, friend. Prior to installation of any brand new part, let's make sure we clean and inspect our mounting area. I'll use some parts cleaner and a wire brush. Now that we've completed that, it's time to install the lower ball joint. Before you can install this, what you're going to find is that the lower ball joint protective boot will need to be removed. You'll find that you have a larger clamp along the base of the ball joint. Let's carefully start dislodging that, being aware of the boot. We do not want to cause any damage. To start removing this, you can either use a small angled pick or a small screwdriver. We're just going to try to find one of the ears. We'll make our way under and gently start prying. Once again, be aware of that boot. Now that I have the outer ring dislodged, we're going to have to focus on the smaller ring here. Now for this one, it's just a little bit different, but either way, we're still making our way under, and we'll carefully start prying this out of position. There we are. Now that I've got some movement here, let's continue on removing that boot. Just double check your boot to confirm it's not torn or damaged in any way. This boot looks good, so we're going to set it aside, and now we can start installing that ball joint. Just apply a thin amount of anti-seize here. When we install our ball joint, it's going to come through from the bottom of the control arm straight up and through. With that said, along the top, we need to make sure we have a cup that's large enough to go around the ball joint. We also want to make sure it has a hole up along the top port so the stud can make its way through. Now that I have that in position, along the bottom of the ball joint, we're going to be using an adapter that goes up against the outer portion of the ball joint. And now, of course, I do need to have a flat area to press against. At this point, we'll continue on with the ball joint press. We're going to start applying upward pressure, and we should bottom out the ball joint with that lower control arm. Now take your time setting this up. We need to confirm everything is properly aligned, especially the upper cup. If this was not properly aligned and you started pressing the ball joint up and hit either the cup or the stud on the ball joint press itself, you could potentially cause damage to your brand new ball joint. We'll just remove this adapter real quick, double check to make sure we can see where our snap ring needs to be. If things need to be adjusted, go ahead and do that now. Once you're sure that you have the ball joint completely seated in the lower control arm, we're continuing on with our snap ring. As far as the snap ring, we need to insert it over the ball joint all the way down into the lower groove along the control arm. Just double check to make sure that's seated all the way around. After installing our locking snap ring, it's time for our protective boot. We're going to take this boot and slide it all the way down the ball joint stud as far as possible. The larger diameter port will have to slide onto this groove. We're pressing it on as far as possible here. Now at this point, you may find that you either have to use a small pick or a small pocket screwdriver to align the boot. After that, we have our metal clip. After sliding the boot all the way on, we'll continue on with our clip. Now as far as this metal clip, we're going to have to carefully start rolling this around the boot. You may have to use your small angled pick. We'll just be careful not to cause any damage to the boot, of course. Double check to make sure that's seated all the way around. The boot cannot come loose. Continuing on, we're going to align the lower ball joint stud with the bottom of our steering knuckle. Carefully pull down on the control arm so you can align the stud with the knuckle. We'll install our pinch bolt. Looking down close to where my fingers are, you can tell that I applied some anti-seize. We're going to take this, we're sliding it through from the front of the knuckle, through past the ball joint stud, all the way to the far side. On the other side, we have our mounting nut. I have that tapped through. Now I'm going to start on the mounting hardware. We'll bottom this out and then torque it to 41 foot-pounds. Looking under our axle, we can see the port on the lower control arm where our front sway bar link needs to align. Rounding nut. We can snug that up and torque it to 66 foot-pounds. Along the outboard side, we can remove our lug nut and our spacer. Now along the back side of the knuckle, we're going to attach our outer tie rod end to the knuckle. We'll carefully pivot things as necessary so we can align them. Start on our mounting nut. On this application, we do have a castle nut, which means it has slots. If you were looking at the tie rod stud, you're going to find a port leading through it. Go ahead and snug this up. Torque it to 35 foot-pounds, and then we'll make sure we can install our locking cotter pin. Now when we look at this, we're attempting to make sure we have our slot aligned with the port on the tie rod end. If it's not aligned, continue tightening until the very next slot is, and then install that locking cotter pin. Now since mine is not fully aligned, I'm just going to continue tightening as I mentioned. One last quick inspection in this area and we can reinstall our front wheel. Once you have all 5 lug nuts on there, we're going to bottom them out in a crisscross manner. We'll get the wheel safely on the ground and then torque each of the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Now I have the wheel back on the ground. Let's go ahead and torque these to that 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. If you have a center cover, install that now. When we install the center cover, we'll make sure that our lug nuts align with the corresponding ports here. Press it in, double check to make sure it's secured all the way around. Okay friend, we finished our installation. Now the next thing you want to do is make sure you pump up the brake pedal till it's firm. After that, take your vehicle for a road test, you're listening for any odd noises, and then get yourself an alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.